But then you learn that this politician is actually a high-ranking SS officer, and he says that fascism is bad, but National Socialism is good. Greetings, this is Eugene the Philosopher, the greatest living philosopher after the unfortunate passing of Quentin Robert de Nameland, who has been the greatest living philosopher before me. In this video, I wish to describe a couple of concepts which I actually use in practical way on this very channel in my videos, alright? These concepts are framing and overflowing. They've been proposed by Michel Callon, who is one of the leading figures in the so-called actor network theory. Which is, I would add, the only reasonable theory in philosophy of science, even though it actually could be generalized onto philosophy in general. Forgive me for tautology. In my earlier videos on this subject, i.e. philosophy of science, and actually many other topics as well, are heavily influenced by it, by actor network theory, or ANT, for abbreviation. I should add here in the preface that, sadly, one of the other leading figures of this theory, Bruno Latour, has passed actually on my birthday, and so I guess now you could say that Michel Callon became the greatest living actor network theorist after the unfortunate passing of Bruno Latour. Whatever. So framing and overflowing, or you might actually sort of rephrase it into packing and unpacking or something like that, were first described in an essay from 1998 by Callon himself. I'm going to link it in the description as well as any other related things that I would find. The essay itself is about 20 pages long, but I'll try to make it briefer for you, alright? So I'll give you a few examples and try to explain these concepts in more detail, in a more simple manner, if you wish. So these two concepts, again, framing and overflowing, work in tandem. So we'll look at the examples that kind of contain both of them simultaneously, right? So, first example, let's imagine you bought some coffee. It could be your favorite coffee, it could be just a random brand of coffee, it doesn't really matter. So, at first, suddenly, let's say, for the sake of argument, you've learned that this coffee is made of GMOs, right? Genetically modified organisms. And you got happy because, well, you might consider GMOs being the future, it's the scientific progress and stuff. But then you may become actually upset on sort of the next level when you learn that it was harvested through exploitation of workers in whatever country it was produced in. So you got upset by this, alright? But then you also learn that the company that produces it also donates a lot of money to charity, and perhaps this charity even donates some money to whatever your favorite organization is. So you became happy because of that. But then, on the even next level, you got upset again because this coffee is exported into your country, imported probably, through some other country with an authoritarian regime or whatever. So they also get some money from you buying this coffee. So all of these layers, right, taken together basically mean that by buying this coffee, you simultaneously support scientific progress, right, the GMOs, the economical exploitation, the whatever practices the producer employs, the social justice, the donation to charity, right, and political authoritarianism in this whatever country it's passing through. Or another example, a politician says, fascism is bad, alright? Well, you obviously nod and agree because with every word they say, because fascism is indeed bad and we have to, it wouldn't hurt to acknowledge it once again, alright? So you're happy with this speech of his. But then you learn that this politician is actually a high-ranking SS officer, and he says that fascism is bad, but National Socialism is good. So basically what he's doing in this speech is juxtaposing Italian fascism with or to the German National Socialism. So you get upset by this, right? Understandably so. So from these two examples, we see, and if you kind of generalize and abstractize it on a higher level, you see that we have already learned to think in contexts, right? To view the things wider and deeper, if you wish, to look for sources and to search for their consequences, etc., etc. So, assume someone is speaking correct things, just like in this example, but when do they speak these things? Like, to whom do they say those things? Where do they do that? Do they even think of, again, all the consequences? Like, how would these things be perceived, right? How would they, what kind of effect would they create down the line, etc.? So, even if you think about the bad things, they also kind of need some context, right? Like, who said these bad things? Where did they do that? You might again go on another, like, meta level, so to speak, like, who remembered those things that were said by another person? When did they remember that? Like, which goal did they pursue while remembering these words that were said? So, returning to the topic, the very topic of the video, framing is exactly that. It's like putting things into a single and fixed context, which means like essentially cutting off or like excluding everything else that might be even remotely related to the problem, getting rid of any connections to other possible contexts, right? That's what framing is. A person who does the framing intends to set up like a completely fixed, completely stable and focused narrative with absolutely no background, right? So pack the situation into this solid black box, self-sufficient, if you wish, with no connections to the outside world. So that when you buy a coffee, returning to that example, or a smartphone or whatever, you won't think of, like the global capitalism or like social justice or like the authoritarian state. These objects that you acquire may be remotely connected to, right? And conversely, overflowing is the addition of concepts. Is the adding of concepts. It leads to increase in this ambiguity, all right? You thought it was that simple, huh? Well, it's not that simple, actually. If you look at it from other perspective, blah, blah, blah. This is what overflowing is. When contexts are multiplied, and the borders of an object or a situation are getting all fuzzy and blurry. So, in some way, your object don't exist anymore, you might say, because the networks involved, see actor network theory, include all the observable universe pretty much. Like you can trace from this object to, I don't know, whatever, like the distant stars even, right? Something like that. And including the abstract world even, like the world of ideas, the world of like political concepts or social concepts, economic concepts, the philosophical, lawmaking, like all religious even, whatever, right? Cultural. Everything, all of that is involved in this cup of coffee you're buying, right? Okay, so I might also bring up physical analogies, as this channel is at least remotely related to physics, right? So framers, or packers if you wish, set up this local reference frame, no pun intended, and pretend that it is sort of like an absolute and like fixed, right? Like nailed to the very ontology, to the fundamental being. While overflowers say, well, there's always another reference frame that you can choose. Like this one is not the absolute reference frame, all right? So reference frame in terms of, like, again, translating into a philosophical language from physical language. So a reference frame would correspond here to a value system. So framer would say, this is good, or packer, right? This is good, while the overflower, the unpacker, would say, well, it's only good in this reference frame, right? In this value system. It could be bad in another. Like in your reference frame, this vector is along the x-axis. Its projection onto x has a positive value. In my reference frame, the x-axis is the opposite, so your vector is negative in my books, so to speak. Okay. So, and obviously, what follows from here is that framers hate the overflowers, right? Packers hate the unpackers because, well, they've just packed this tiny, shiny little box, and the unpackers are trying to sort of like rip it open, right? Yeah. So, the main point, however, that's kind of a big thing actually, is that the difference between packers and unpackers, between framers and overflowers, is only quantitative. It's not a qualitative difference. It's literally just the difference in the number of contexts, not like any other fundamental type of difference. So Packer would say this is obviously bad, versus unpacker could say not obviously, right? Did you think about the Y factor? Did you think about the Z factor, etc., etc.? So anyway, this network-oriented approach with both framing and overflowing explained in this manner might encounter, and actually does encounter, a sort of like a reaction to it, which you might call vaguely radical anti-contextualism, right? Where some people are tempted to say, like, maybe screw all the contexts altogether. Maybe we just take the object as it is, in a literal sense, as literal sense as possible. So you might see that as a pretty extremely naively and, nihilistic, in a bad sense of the word, approach. It's sort of like, let's close our eyes and hope it will go away type of approach, right? Let's close our eyes and think that the contexts can be just completely ignored, right? Whereas, obviously, contexts do exist, right? And any value judgment is always contextual. And like the context may be set up by things like your genetic code again. Like it's some very deep layers of interpretation of the world that you have in you. Like again, see my video E.th.ph, where I claim that this is actually the most important interpretation you might have, if you wish. Okay, so again, in a way, these concepts of Callon show inherent limitations of A&T, actor network theory, that using the theory in any situation pretty much would lead to like realization that we can reinterpret this situation in infinite amount of ways, all right? To the point where it's like the situation itself disappears, right? It kind of dissolves in the universe, right? Time is a universal solvent, remember? The words of the philosopher. So, but to conclude, I would say that it's actually a good thing that A&T recognizes its own limitations, right? Its own limits. Because a good, again, returning to physics, a good physical theory, for example, should actually kind of set up in front the conditions under which it's applicable, right? Otherwise, if you just blindly apply a theory beyond the borders of its applicability, like you would encounter various artifacts, right? The monsters would appear. If you sail in an uncharted land, uncharted seas, rather, hic draconis sunt, the dragons would attack you. So you will encounter things like black holes, which is a mathematical artifact of general relativity, or dark matter, which is a mathematical artifact of Newtonian gravitation, or a point-like particles with infinite mass, which is again a mathematical artifact of quantum mechanics, or even like a naive perception of particle physics in classical approach. So yeah, watch my video Beyond the Border, where I describe this in more detail. So long story short, it's good that A&T actually indicates that, yeah, well, at some point, things become actually irrelevant. The context multiplies so much that the context itself becomes meaningless, right? Even though, again, as I would argue, the opposite naive reaction to it, which is a radical anti-contextualism, is like, it's not really viable, right? Okay, so that will be all, I guess. Thank you for watching. The eons are closing.